Hey guys, how you doing? My name is Nader.
And I'm Shayan.
And welcome to the Chetori Podcast.
Yes, this podcast is basically about Iran and everything related to Iran. Its history, its culture, the current social issues that are taking place in Iran. So yeah, this podcast, if you want to learn more about Iran and if you're someone who is of Iranian heritage, or maybe you're a second generation Iranian, you don't really know much about Iran, or just anyone in general who wants to learn more about Iran, this is the podcast that you want to check out.
We thought that particularly given current events which are happening, particularly with the current protests revolving around the death of Mahsa Amini and hijab and the larger movement that happened afterwards, there's a lot of people that are interested in learning what's going on, but maybe because they don't speak Farsi that well, they don't read or write Farsi, or they just don't know some of the history.
Yeah, or they don't have relatives in Iran to tell them like what's going on, on the ground.
They don't have relatives, they haven't been there ever or for a very long time. They don't really know who to believe and what to believe. And, from one perspective, they kind of see this official government narrative.
Yeah.
Of this is just a bunch of people who are tricked by the West or they're spies, and you feel like this is probably not entirely correct, but at the same time they might be whether they look at Mano to Iran International, BBC,
that's the other
Persian,
side, the other side, looking at all these other Western media outlets,
or they'll just look at the English speaking media and they'll feel like sometimes they'll run into some things and they're not sure whether to believe that either, and you feel like, well, what should we believe in? Where can we even look? And there's a general state of confusion. At the same time, there's a lot of people that have mixed feelings because of some of their preconceived notions. I've talked to a lot of people that are very religious, and somehow they feel like it's compromising their Muslim values if you question what the Iranian government is doing. Why are we going around beating up random women in the street?
Yeah, or they were brought up a certain way to have admiration towards certain figures in the government. So they're very apprehensive in, questioning those individuals who are in the top position of the Islamic Republic.
Or just this historical narrative that we are always taught of, that there were these good guys and there were the bad guys.
Yeah.
And on the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of people that learn the opposite historical narrative, that another group of people were good and bad, and they question too what narrative is going on over there. And so we thought that while a lot of people who are in Iran or go to Iran a lot or speak Farsi very well might have a little bit exposure to the type of nuance that actually exists and the historical context of why certain things are happening, well, the English-speaking world does not have access to those resources, and we hope to, in this episode and in many future episodes, share to you why are things happening, what has happened before, and make sense a little bit about
just take a deep dive into all this stuff, all these events, what happened, why did it happen, what happened in the past that led to this now that we're facing today. So we're just going to try to take a deep dive into all of this.
So to start off, let's look at what started these immediate rounds of protests, which was the death of Mahsa Amini.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Now, on September 13th of 2022, a couple months ago, a 22-year-old by the name of Mahsa Amini, also known as Gina Amini, she lived in a city called Saqqez in the Kurdistan region of Iran, and she had come to Tehran to visit her family. And she is arrested by Gashte Ershad.
Yes, the religious morality police of Iran.
Yeah, the Gashte Ershad is essentially I believe it's a part of the larger police.
Yes.
And they are in charge of enforcing, among other things, Iran's dress code.
Yeah, basically Islamic law in general.
But specifically the dress code. And there's been periods where it's been a little bit stricter. There's been periods where it's been less strict. There's been periods where sometimes they even go after some men if their t-shirts are, too short.
If their hair is too long sometimes.
Or if their hair is too long. The exact details of what they go about is different. But this was a period, particularly since the beginning of the summer of 2022, where they had been a little bit more strict. And we'll go into that a little bit more in the history of this in future episodes. But they go and they arrest this woman on September 13th. Yes. Now, usually what happens is They will arrest them. They transfer them to a police van, sometimes quite violently. We don't know if that happened with her or not because there's not any footage released of the arrest. And then they transfer her to a detention facility. In that detention facility, if it's their first time offense, then they usually have to go through basically a class, like the equivalent of driver's ed, where you have to go if you break traffic laws.
Watch a video too,
It's either a video or someone speaks for them, but they have, that's part of the punishment they have to do. I believe they have to sign some form that they're not going to do this again. And then after some point, they're let go. So she is in that detention facility, and for whatever reason, she collapses.
Yeah, there's a CCTV footage actually of her entering the facility, and I think she sits down, she watches the video, and at some point in the video, she goes up to this lady who seems to be a police officer, and she talks to her, and the police officer in the video, you can see...
She says something.
Yeah, she says something to Mahsa, and she even like touches her garment that she's wearing and like kind of like lifts it and drops it in a disrespectful manner. And then you see in the video, Mahsa Amini, she goes towards this a chair, her hands on the chair, and then all of a sudden she just collapses. And I don't know in the video, but it seems like her head maybe have hit the chair. I can't tell. Maybe it didn't hit the head.
What happened and whether she was beaten in the police van before this, what Shayan is describing is the official government CCTV footage, which was released a little bit afterwards, but it was a little bit incomplete. We're not sure what happened before it. We're not quite sure how long it took for an ambulance to come, but this 22-year-old seemingly healthy girl collapses in police custody. And then she is taken to, I believe, Kasra Hospital in Tehran. We don't know about this happening at the time, but on September 16th, there is a prominent Iranian journalist, Niloufar Hamedi, who works for the newspaper Shar, and she's later arrested for this. She breaks the story of this with a picture of Amini's father and grandmother, and they're in the hospital hallway and they're crying. And they're devastated, and later there's a picture of Mahsa herself. She looks quite bruised. She's not doing too well. And I believe on that same day, September 16th, she does pass away. She dies.
Yes.
Now, after Mahsa dies, there is a lot of outrage. Because of the reporting that was done by this reporter, this was already something that was trending on Iranian social media, among Iranians. And there was a lot of outrage. And we immediately start getting protests, particularly in Kurdistan. She's almost very quickly buried. They take her body to Saqqez, which is her home city. They bury her, and there's immediately videos from her burial which show protests, which show, I remember it exactly the first time I saw it, that there were women and they tore off their own headscarves.
Yes, and then that's when the slogan, Jan Azadi, which in Farsi is Zan Zandagi Azadi, that's where it came from, pretty much, I believe.
And so in the beginning, it's more in her own city and in other cities in Kurdistan and Kurdish regions of Iran. It's not just Kurdistan province; they're also in other provinces. But within that week, you start getting in all over Tehran, all over Isfahan, Mashhad.
It just quickly spreads.
Yeah, especially in the north of Iran, Rasht, Mazandaran. We start getting protests, and sometimes quite violent clashes between police officers and protesters. About 2 weeks later, there's an incident in Zahedan, which is in one of the most underprivileged parts of Iran, Sistan Baluchistan, near the Pakistani border. Where during Friday prayers, an
incident takes place.
Crackdown
on protests.
And there's actually, so this was partially due to what happened with Mahsa Amini. But there is also something else, right?
Yeah, there's another part of the story, which, so basically prior to the Mahsa Amini incident, a police officer, a colonel Ibrahim Kuchagzai in Chalbahar, which is a city in Sistan and Balochistan, interviewed a 15-year-old girl because of an incident of a murder case in a nearby house. Now, allegedly, this individual, this colonel, told the girl to that he had to inspect her body, and then he proceeded to molest and rape the girl. Who the girl later on went and informed her mother of this, and causing much anger.
This is the allegation.
Yes, this is the allegation.
But this is not just a random rumor that's on Twitter or something.
Yeah.
I think even some of the Friday prayer leaders of both I think Zahedan and a couple of the other cities were openly saying this. We're not just they're not just going to say rumors. So there's pretty strong allegations that there was a young girl that was raped. At the same time that there's these larger nationwide incidents happening. And so after the Friday prayers, a group of protesters starts moving towards, I believe it's a police station or a Basij station.
Yeah.
Now, we're not quite sure what happened. Depends on if you believe the government narrative or you believe the Baluch people's narrative. But either the police start getting startled and they start shooting, or some of the protesters start throwing rocks at the police and then they shoot. But regardless, the police shoot what appears to be live ammunition.
Yeah, 96, allegedly 96 people were killed.
Several hundred injured.
300 plus injured. And of the security forces, 4 people were killed. Now, here's this funny thing. I remember on Instagram watching these videos of these protests and this violent crackdown going on. And some were saying that some of these protesters were carrying weapons. And which is the reason why the police started shooting into the crowd. Now, I don't really know. I've seen the video of people, of regular civilians using weapons. Now, I don't know if that was the cause for this massacre that took place, but I just want to throw that out there. This is just something that I noticed.
And I think there was a couple of high-level military people and police people that were assassinated afterwards in that region.
Right.
I don't exactly remember the timeline of when that happened, but that was largely seen as a response to it. The Friday prayer leader of Zahedan, Maulavi Abdul Hamid, and we can talk a little bit more about his history later, he starts becoming a very vocal anti-government voice. I believe he even criticizes the supreme leader, which is a big deal in Iran. And he demands for accountability. Yes. And this incident was called Jom'eh Khunin, Bloody Friday of Zahedan. Mm-hmm. As a result of this, now we start having both protests within Iran's kind of interior, particularly Tehran, particularly some areas in northern Iran, but also very, very violent protests in Kurdistan and Kurd regions, and quite big and violent protests in Zahedan.
And what we mean by these violent protests is that basically clashes between the protesters and the security forces. And the security forces using, first, they were using batons, paintball guns, tasers. They were using rubber bullets, and even pellets as well. But then later using, because of the ferocity or the ferociousness of the protests, and how big it was becoming, how many people were joining these protests, and the security force started using live ammunition. Now that's when things became a lot more bloody than it was. Hold on, but I want to go back back to Sistan Baluchistan real quick. Back to Maulavi Abdul Hamid Ismaili.
Maulavi Abdul Hamid.
Yes. So this individual, he is a Sunni figure. He is the imam of this very famous mosque in that region. He basically called out the Iranian government right then and there. He commented on the Iranian government's claim that the killings were perpetrated by separatist terrorist groups such as Jaish al-Adl, saying that he said that basically no, these guys were not the people who were responsible for any of this. The government security forces, they just started shooting at people and using snipers to shoot at people in the head and in the heart. This is what he said himself.
And this is notable because Maulavi Abdul Hamid was a person that previously, particularly within Iranian presidential elections, is important. In the 2013 elections, when Rouhani was first elected, he famously endorsed Rouhani, and that helped him get a large proportion of the votes in Sistan Baluchistan, which helped the reformists win over there. In the next election, in Hazara Charsad, what I'm talking about is the 2017 elections. He endorsed Rouhani, and then in the subsequent 2021 elections, he endorsed Raisi, who ended up also winning the election, and it was a big switch. And he has been a source of the different presidential administrations' getting legitimacy.
Yes.
Even the supreme leader, when he comes there, he talks with them. The supreme leader, famously during the Shah's time, was exiled in Baluchistan.
Really? Okay. I didn't know that.
And so that area, he has a lot of connections there, and that's one of the people. So it's a pretty big deal that he came out so intensely.
Yeah, he's a huge figure.
And openly against the entirety of the government. And he wasn't accepting the government narrative. And by the way, and at the same time, what is the government saying? What is the government narrative? The government is, first of all, expressing sadness over the incident.
Yes.
I believe both the President Raisi called the family of Mahsa Amini.
He called for an investigation into the matter.
I think the Supreme Leader even said something, but the line that gets repeated, and when we go into some previous cases of protests, we'll see that this is parallels a lot what's happened previously, is that they say that we're sad about this, it's a tragedy, but foreign forces are taking advantage of this.
Yes.
And they're plotting and they're using this as an excuse to weaken the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, just to push their own agenda.
Yeah, basically they're saying that what some people's righteous anger is being hijacked by foreigners. And they also, with respect to what's happening both in Zahedan and Kurdistan, talk about separatists. In Kurdistan, they did some missile attacks on
on the Komala bases in the northern Iraq, in the Kurdistan region. They were using this. They were saying that basically a lot of these protesters, they were separatists, especially in the Kurdistan region of Iran. They were separatists, and they were smuggling weapons into that region, and that is why basically there was these fierce clash, or these clashes taking place in that region.
To be fair, there have been previous cases where both in Kurdistan, there's been anti-government separatist troops, and they've had clashes with the central government, even during the Shah's time. And in Zahedan, Jundullah, for years, they were a terrorist group that was attacking both civilians and military forces.
Right.
But that was the government side. Now, I know, Shayan, that you are close with a number of your family figures that were in Iran during the time, and they actually saw up close some of these incidents.
Yeah.
Going aside from the headlines, like what were you hearing from your family?
Basically, so when this incident took place, the death of Mahsa Amini, the protests quickly spread. I have a relative who basically was in these protests. He took part in these protests. And what he saw basically was that a lot of the protesters were very young, like 19, 18, 20-year-olds, 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
So Gen Zs, essentially.
Yeah, Gen Zs. There were no leaders. They're just out in the streets, shouting slogans, clashing with the police, lighting dumpsters on fire, clashing with the police. And so what he saw was that the police really tried to, at first, not use, like
lethal force.
They would just come in, use their batons, smack anyone and everyone. It didn't matter if you're just walking to, the grocery store or whatever. Wrong place, wrong time. You're gonna get hit. So he saw that a lot. And then he saw them using tear gases. They were shooting directly at times at protesters. He told me that a few times he nearly got hit by these tear gases. One time he was telling me that they were in the streets, they were protesting. He saw security forces coming forward, started shooting tear gases, and then he looked up for a second. He saw this object coming straight towards his head. I swear to God, it came straight towards his head, and he just dodged it, and it went over his head.
So that's probably not a lethal ammunition bullet, though, if you could see it. But it was probably some form of crowd control.
If those tear gases contact hit you,
that hits you in the head. That's not even gas. That's a blunt force.
You could die. You could die. There were a few people around who got hit by pellet guns and stuff like that. And
did he see anyone die?
He didn't see anyone die, but he did see a lot of people get hit with these paintballs and tear gases and whatnot.
And I know on social media, there's a lot of videos of police seemingly randomly hitting people, even random passerbys, and a lot of people question, is this real? Is this fake news? Did he see the police physically beating people up?
Yeah, he did. The security police, the whole job was to disperse the crowd. So it didn't matter if you were there protesting or you weren't protesting. And a lot of times there'd be a huge group of protesters, and the security forces will try to infiltrate these protesters through various tactics in order to separate groups so that they could engage each group at a time and to basically disperse these groups. A few times he nearly got trapped, but by the grace of God, he was able to escape. But yeah, he has a lot of coworkers who also took part in these protests who were telling him that I got hit with the pellet gun, I got hit by a rubber bullet, or I got hit by a baton. So
and these are pretty like wealthy, educated
this is Tehran.
people in Tehran. I don't think they're particularly sympathetic towards the previous monarchy or pro-Israel or anything like that, are they?
I don't know, but all I know is that they took part in the protests, and they were there in the scene. Yeah. So what about you, Nader? Were you did you see anything when you went to Iran?
Yeah, so I actually was in Iran around November to January.
Okay.
I think my experience was a little bit different because I think what you're describing was probably towards the beginning in September and October.
Yeah.
I remember before going into Iran, a lot of people were telling me that I was making a mistake. They're going to take away my passport. They're in the airport. Mm-hmm. They're going to search my phone and take away my phone in the airport. I actually spent the better parts of 2 weeks just erasing like every social media post I'd ever made and deleting every little Instagram and WhatsApp thing I've downloaded.
Yeah, because you never know.
And it was completely pointless. When I went into the airport, not a single person looked at my phone. The overwhelming impression I got was that the government was trying to show that everything's normal. Mm-hmm. They did not take anything away. I'll be honest, I went from the south of Tehran to the north of Tehran. I went to cities in the west of Iran, the east of Iran, south of Iran. I didn't go to the north. That was probably the only part I didn't go. But I did not see direct protests. Yeah. What I did see, a lot of was on the walls.
Slogans.
There's always been graffiti on walls, whether that's advertisements, whether that's
but was it more
threatening messages that if you park here, we're gonna rip off we're gonna puncture your tires.
Yeah.
But yes, it was far more than I'd seen before.
What were some of the slogans you saw?
Everything from Zan Zindagi Azadi, woman, life, freedom, death to the dictator.
Yeah, death to this certain figure.
I was there when a particular figure. We shall overcome. We will win. Mm-hmm. There was one day that I was there that there was the first execution that they did of a person relating to the protests. We can get more into the details of that.
I know what you're talking about.
And there was a lot of revenge, which I saw in Intiqam.
Yeah.
Which was written there. We will continue.
Mm-hmm. Just the various slogans.
Yeah, death to oppression, stuff along that lines. And there was also, it's funny because you would see a series of slogans pop up, and I want to emphasize, I mean, all over Iran, literally every single alleyway was just covered in these things.
Yeah.
But you would wake up and I get to know, there's this one particular slogan written, on this place near my house, and then it would get X'd out at night, or someone would write instead of death to the dictator, they'd X it out and write death to the hypocrite.
Or they would paint over it again.
Yeah,
and then the next day,
next morning. Or Akhund Buragom, a lot of stuff against clergy also.
Oh, of course.
I did not see what was interesting for me, I did not see anything directly attacking Islam. Saying, Islam is a terrorist religion, something like that. But I did see a lot of stuff attacking clergy.
Now, but here's the thing, though. When you say that you didn't see attack on Islam, but if you go on Instagram, especially like Iranian Instagram, where Iranian admins and stuff like that, Iranian pages, you'll see those type of messages attacking.
But it was interesting. Why, if someone's gonna risk their life or their freedom or whatever you want to say, and write death to the supreme leader and write his name on the wall, what's to stop him to write something about religion or Islam also?
Because
it was interesting for me. I didn't see that. Not, it might be somewhere else. I did not exhaustively look through every alleyway of every city in Tehran.
Right.
But I want to emphasize, I went to some of the richest areas,
mm-hmm.
and I went to some of the poorest areas, and it was all over. But it was stuff on the wall. It was not stuff. I didn't even see. A couple of times I saw security, the riot police, anti-riot police, but even those, I was surprised. I did not see that as many. The big change I did see was that there was a lot of women without any hijab on.
Yeah.
And that was something that before, yes, he would see people that would have a half scarf.
Wait, no hijab at all? As in,
all.
Not even around their neck?
No, they didn't even bring it with them outside.
Wow.
Old women and young women.
Okay.
It was not everyone. I would say maybe out of every 10 women, maybe 3
like
of them,
30%.
30%. If I was at a higher end, shopping mall or something, it would probably be 80%.
Yeah, I guess it just depends where you are.
And it was interesting because it reminded me a lot of pictures I've seen from the Shah's time, where there was a Chetori lady, and then there was a hijab lady, a woman without hijab, right next to them. I did not see anyone that, by Western standards, would be considered immodest, but that's probably because it was also the winter.
Yeah.
There was one girl I saw, there was some teenager I saw on the metro that she had a little bit of her stomach out.
Yeah.
But that was literally the only person I saw in a month and a half of being in Iran. But particularly in Tehran was a little bit more than any other city.
Yeah.
But that was a big thing. I know now, supposedly, they're saying we're going to start enforcing it again, but instead of putting people in vans, we're just going to take pictures of them and then find them.
Which is kind of crazy considering whatever, what just took place.
But I think it will be difficult to bring it back to, put the cat back in the bag.
No, it's not going to happen.
But that was interesting. Even in the airport, even in Mehrabad airport, even in government banks and government offices, women I saw without hijab. I was surprised.
What about IKA airport?
Yeah, IKA. Even back in the day, I would see people take off their hijabs.
Really?
But yeah, IKA, Mehrabad, and it was interesting because it wasn't even seen as something unusual. Like, people weren't looking at them weird if they were without hijabs. It was something that was almost normalized within society, at least in Tehran.
Yeah.
And I did not see any clashes. And I've seen accounts of certain, let's say, pro-Iranian, pro-resistance axis reporters that will go walk around in Tehran and they'll say, yeah, there's nothing going on and everything's calm. I could see how someone that doesn't speak Farsi and isn't familiar with things might think everything is calm. I did not get the impression everything's calm, everything's okay.
Yeah, definitely not.
Because both, the writing's literally on the walls. When you sit down in people's private houses, when you sit down in office buildings, when you sit down even on the metro and you're paying attention to what's on people's phones and what they're speaking to each other, people are still very angry.
Yep.
People are still very outraged. People talk to me about how the previous months there had been violent protests.
Definitely.
And it seemed there were less protests, but they were still angry. They were still outraged. But it was not quite what I was seeing on social media either. Mm-hmm. I'll completely admit that to you. A lot of the people I talked to, I asked them, are you sympathetic with the protests? Yes, there was not everyone. I will say that. It's not universal.
Yeah.
But a lot of people were sympathetic with the protests, but I asked them, did you go protest? Would you go protest? And the answer was no, because they had children, they were young, they were afraid, they had heard stories of things that had happened to people that had been arrested, and they didn't feel like things had reached a point where they had nothing to lose. And so there was a semblance of normality, normal life. Not everything was, oh my God, the revolution is happening. But at its core, there was that anger.
Yeah, definitely.
I think in future episodes, we'll go a little bit more in detail about the history of the fact that this is not, the first wave of protests which are happening, particularly in the past 5 or 6 years. But this is almost the latest manifestation of this underlying anger that exists. And the other interesting thing that I think has happened as a result of these latest round of protests is that it's highlighted a lot of divisions that exist within Iranian society itself, between different generations, between so-called, and I don't like these terms, but for lack of a better term, religious Iranians and secular Iranians.
Seculars, yeah.
And this division of worldviews that exists, and a larger, I think, discussion that's being had within Iranians, particularly inside Iran, of what does it even mean to be religious? What is the place of religion in society? And how do we deal with this 250-year-old question of, sunnat, which is tradition, versus modernity?
Yeah.
And it's funny, even among non-Iranians, a lot, particularly Shias, a lot of Shia Muslims,
very opinionated,
who are very opinionated, it's brought up a lot of questions about what is the relationship between their faith and the current rulers of Tehran.
Yeah.
And do some of the assumptions that they've had for years still, are they valid given the events that have happened? And
hopefully in the near future episodes we could dive into that a little bit, and I think this is a good place to end it. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.